So we have a bit of an update around the Switch 2 game keycard situation as one publisher decided to take matters into their own hands and actually confirm some of the information and rumors that were floating around. And it doesn't appear like it was something Nintendo was too happy about because, well, I observed this happening in real time along with everyone else online to where things had to be deleted and edited and flipped around. But it's also brought up the other question around what if everything was on the cartridge with a certain compromise, specifically pricing of the game. And that's what we're going to go over here today. So if you guys enjoy this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you're new. So to catch everyone up, just in case you missed this, we actually talked about this on Newswave yesterday. And what was happening, as you can see, Nintendo and many other people were kind of throwing this around throughout the day that they can confirm smaller capacity Switch 2 game cards are in production, but due to chip shortages, it will take time before we see widespread availability. Despite the smaller capacity, these cards will still be expensive due to rising cost of materials. So yes, game key cards, they're not going away necessarily. And that has been one of the big sticking points for the Switch 2 is that file sizes are just getting massive. Even on Nintendo's new system, as we've seen in the past with the Switch 1, it seemed like file sizes, especially from Nintendo, were kind of at least under control. But now with Age of Imprisonment, that's 40 some odd gigabytes, and something tells me other games from Nintendo in the future, this generation, will also test the limits of how much they can get away with, say, what would have been in a 32 gigabyte cartridge. I kind of feel like Nintendo themselves will even be going beyond that and maybe really taking advantage of a 64 gigabyte cartridge that they themselves have been using this entire time. But the problem is, even that is getting more and more expensive as we see all kinds of materials behind the scenes going up. RAM being the big one, but we know solid state storage, and that does also end up with things like SD cards or NAND flash or what would even be going into these cartridges, that getting more expensive. It does make me wonder where we're sitting with the price point of a 64 gigabyte cartridge behind the scenes if you need to order. Could end up being millions of these things, depending on how big your game is. Even though maybe it's thousands, it still adds up very, very quickly, and you have to decide on what your margin is going to be. Well, here is in Games, and they've been building up to their R-Type Dimensions 3 launch, and that is next year. I think it's May 2026. And they've been kind of going back and forth on the idea of a game key card or a full cartridge for the Switch 2. The PlayStation 5 version, that's already figured out. They're going to put on a Blu-ray disc. No real issues there, of course. But the cartridge, that was coming up, and people were not thrilled with the idea of a game key card, especially in the more expensive collector's edition. And that I can definitely understand. Again, you get down to the $50 or $60 range for a game. The game key card does make more sense for smaller developers, publishers, or even games that, I mean, let's face it, if the game is I think R-Type is 10 gigabytes is what's at least mentioned on Steam. If it's that, how much space are you wasting when you use a 64 gigabyte cartridge? It is kind of ridiculous that there wouldn't be a smaller cartridge that maybe would be more feasible in terms of the cost, right? So they've gone back and forth, and now all of a sudden something's changed, and this is a now deleted message they put up over on Twitter X. They say, we're happy to share a positive update regarding the Switch 2 version of R-Type Dimensions 3. There is no better timing. 2 days ago, Nintendo announced 2 new smaller cartridge sizes for the Nintendo Switch 2. This allows us to recalculate production in a way that, and they go on, I screen capped this because I was like, this is not staying up. This thing is going away. So here's the deal. You see a lot of people yesterday who were running around with the, hey, there are these other cartridges. There are smaller sizes. Well, no one said there were 2 new smaller cartridge sizes. So I see that and I go, well, okay, I guess that at least answers that side. Is like, well, okay, how much is Nintendo able to provide here in terms of options? Well, according to Inin, who, yes, would have knowledge. I mean, look, they've shifted everything over to this, to where they are going to have at least on cartridge for this reason. There are more options that aren't as expensive as a 64 gigabyte cartridge. So now we start to think about sizes that Nintendo could be offering. I wouldn't mind if they went with an 8 gigabyte and maybe then a 32 gigabyte, something like that. The 16 gigabytes been thrown out there, and I don't know, a 16 and a 32 doesn't necessarily solve the issue that maybe a small indie developer and publisher would be going into with a 2 gigabyte game, 3 gigabyte game or something. Still feels like a lot of unnecessary cost for that game. But I guess if you're in that double A space, even many triple A publishers would probably take advantage of at least a 32 gigabyte cartridge or a 16 gig. But basically, they've whittled it down to there being two smaller cartridge sizes. And we know this because, again, this is just gone. They had to delete this. I assume Nintendo came knocking. The call was made because it was not something that necessarily was supposed to get out there. And it's it's tight-lipped right now around the whole cartridge thing is what I'll say, what's going around. So this was their website originally, because they posted this on their website, like, hey, let's explain what's happening and how we are going to have a cartridge for this game that's not a game key card. Say there's no better timing. Again, 2 days ago, Nintendo announced two new smaller cartridge sizes for the Switch 2. They didn't delete this because this is an entire update on their website. They just went ahead and updated it. So instead, we're happy to share a positive update regarding the Switch 2 version. We could recalculate the production in a way that wasn't possible before. As a result, we've made the following decision. The entire European and US production of R-Type Dimensions 3 for Switch 2 will be released on a full physical cartridge. Now, I wonder what changes randomly happened. So, yeah, again, it's probably a publisher who maybe got really excited that the timing is good for them. In this case, if there is a cheaper alternative for a game that's about 10 gigabytes, so you assume, okay, a 16 or a 32, either one is just cheaper than the 64 gigabyte option. And I'm actually interested in now getting this like physically. I wasn't necessarily something that was completely on my radar before this, but now it's kind of down to science. Just this to me is confirmed as just using one of the smaller cartridges. We're not going to be sure about any of the other games that come out. This one, though, just because of what's happened here, pretty obvious that this is going to be one of the other cartridges that we haven't seen before. So this coming out May 2026, I'm inclined to put a pre-order in on this. But here's the thing. There is a legitimate cost to this, all right? So even though there are smaller cartridge sizes that are becoming available, it does seem that it's still not cheap enough to really even things out to where it would be the same price as the PlayStation 5 version. In fact, they say it's going to be $10 more. $70 for this is the special edition version versus if we go to the PS5, it's 60, right? And they do also have the big collector's edition here. That one is $200, and then the big collector's edition on the PS5, they also have at $200. So if you want to spend more money and go for the big collector's edition, they seem to have maybe rolled that into the cost. But again, when you get lower in terms of price point of 60 or 70, that cartridge does become a lot more relevant in terms of cost. And this then brings up the question, would you spend more money, $10 more in this case, 60 versus 70, to ensure that everything is on that cartridge? Would you spend more money to get the full cartridge versus the game key card? That is an interesting conundrum to present there, right? And here's the other thing. Who knows where the costs around cartridges or RAM or solid state drives or any of this stuff is going to go over the next 12 to 24 months, as there's a lot of concerns that it will be going up quite a bit, like sharply in terms of costs. So it's good that it seems like Nintendo is trying to figure something out here. But my concern is they introduce, we'll just say, a 16 gigabyte cartridge right now. It's like, hey, look, this makes sense for people. But then in 8 months, it costs the same as the 64 gigabyte cartridge did the year prior. So that is something that's going to have to be figured out. And I'd like to think in the long run, like as we're on the back half of this generation, that a lot of this is worked out. Just over time, these cartridges do indeed become cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. I don't know if they'll ever become as cheap as a game key card, because it seems like that's, almost like bottom of the barrel cost right now in terms of getting your game on store shelves for the Switch 2. But I'd like to think it becomes almost negligible to where publishers are like, you know what, we would like our game on the cartridge completely. And maybe not have to worry about, hey, what happens in 20 years? Although, will they really care about what happens in 20 years for that? But interesting stuff to see it basically confirmed. And I guess they got tapped on the shoulder a bit there, maybe by Nintendo, around the idea of, not sharing that information. But it seems like, according to INN, there are 2 additional sizes for cartridges that have at least been introduced. And I guess it's been also confirmed that by May 2026, we'll see them at least somewhat out in the marketplace, especially with R-Type Dimensions 3. So maybe I'll be picking one up and we'll cut it open and see exactly what's going on in there. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.